The penthouse office of Jackson J.R. Ramsey, a titan of Texas oil and land, was a monument to sun-baked power. It wasn't the sterile glass box of a New York financier. It was a throne room of the South. A sprawling desk, crafted from a single slab of mesquite wood, faced panoramic windows that looked out over the endless sprawl of Dallas. The walls were paneled in rich dark leather, accented with subtle silver longhorn emblems and framed geological maps of the Permian Basin. The air, usually thick with the scent of good whiskey and multi-billion-dollar deals, was now stagnant with a greedy, suffocating anticipation. The vultures had come home to circle the carcass. Wyatt Ramsey, J.R. quote, "'S only son and the heir he assumed himself to be, scuffed the gleaming toes of his ostrich-skin boots on the antique Navajo rug." His custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the restless energy of a man who had never truly worked a day in his life. "Where in the Sam Hill is Beaufort King?" he drawled, his voice a tight coil of impatience. He checked the diamond-studded Rolex on his wrist. "I've got a suite booked for the Cowboys game. This whole song and dance is ridiculous. Daddy loved his drama, but this is a new low." His sister Dallas was artfully arranged on a leather couch, performing a convincing pageant of sorrow. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, though her gaze kept flicking to her reflection in the polished surface of a side table. "Now, Wyatt, be patient," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Daddy was a traditional man. This is his final word. We just have to trust he did the right thing. You know, split everything right down the middle, the way it ought to be." Her husband, Travis, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his sycophancy, nodded vigorously beside her, patting her hand. "Whatever you deserve, darling," he murmured. Huddled in a corner, radiating a lifetime of resentment, sat Clayton Ramsey, J.R. quote, S. younger brother. His off-the-rack suit was a decade out of style, and his face was a permanent mask of grievance. "Should have been half mine from the start," he muttered to no one in particular. "He got the luck, I got the smarts. Never did see it that way." He was here to claim the half of the kingdom he felt was stolen from him at birth. The trio was a perfect portrait of a family held together only by a shared last name and a mutual desire for the fortune attached to it. They were strangers to the grit and vision of the man who built it all. Then, Dallas's gaze, cold and dismissive, landed on the fourth figure in the room. A woman in her late 50s, sitting upright on a simple chair near the door. She wore a modest but dignified dress, her hair pinned back in a practical bun, her hands worn with work folded in her lap. Peggy Dawson, J.R. Ramsey's executive assistant, his loyal shadow for over 30 years. "And what's she still doing here?" Dallas whispered loudly to Travis. "Did she forget her way to the door? Honestly, you'd think the help would know when to make themselves scarce." Wyatt let out a short, ugly laugh. "Let her stay. It's a good lesson for the staff. Let 'em see what a real inheritance looks like. Daddy probably left her a signed photo and a bonus check to cover her rent for a year. The loyal old bird? He always was a sucker for loyalty." Clayton sneered openly. "She was his gatekeeper. Blocked every call I ever made to him for a brotherly chat. Knew more about his business than his own family. Probably thinks she's got something coming to her." They failed to notice the minute tightening of Peggy's jaw. She heard every venomous word, every casual cruelty. Her expression remained a placid mask, but deep inside, a cold resolve was hardening. She knew them. She knew their petty jealousies, their bottomless greed. And she knew with absolute certainty why J.R. had asked her personally to be in this room. This wasn't a courtesy. This was the final move in J.R. quote, S. last, great poker game. Peggy Dawson sat as still as a stone, the cacophony of their entitlement washing over her. In her purse was a small, embroidered handkerchief, a gift from J.R. quote, S. late wife Loretta years ago. It was already damp from the private tears she had shed the night before, in the quiet solitude of her small Garland bungalow. Today was not a day for her grief. Today was for his legacy. She remembered a different Jackson Ramsey, not the legend whose name could make or break a man in the oil patch, but Jack, a wildcatter with fire in his eyes and grease under his fingernails. He had started with a single rusty rig and an office in a dusty trailer outside of Odessa, and he'd hired her when she was just a young widow looking for a steady job. He was all consuming energy and gut instinct, a force of nature who believed the earth would provide if you just knew where to look. She had been his anchor. She kept his books in meticulous ledgers while he chased deals, organized his chaotic schedule, and was the one who made sure he ate something other than coffee and ambition. When her own husband passed away from a sudden heart attack, Jack hadn't just sent a check. He had shown up on her doorstep, a hulking, awkward presence in her small living room, and simply said, "Take all the time you need, Peggy. The Wells will still be there when you get back. We're family." He'd paid for the funeral, handled the arrangements, and fended off the creditors himself. That was the man he was, and his real family. She had watched them grow into disappointments. Wyatt, who crashed his first brand-new Ford F-150 within a week and expected another one to appear in the driveway, no questions asked. Dallas, who demanded a prize-winning quarter horse for her 16th birthday, only to ride it twice before complaining it was too much work, leaving the stable hands to care for the neglected animal. And Clayton, the perennial failure, whose revolutionary new fracking company had gone belly up, costing JR a small fortune to bail him out and clean up the legal mess. "Daddy, you just don't get it. This is about image," she remembered Wyatt shouting after a particularly lavish expenditure. "We're Ramseys. We can't be seen driving last year's model." Dallas would chime in on other occasions. "But Daddy, everyone in the club is redoing their kitchen. It's embarrassing." JR would absorb their demands with a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping. After they'd leave, pockets full, he'd turn to Peggy, the fire in his eyes dimmed by a deep, weary sadness. "They see the ranch, but they don't see the fences I mended," he'd said once, staring out at the Dallas skyline. "They see the money, but they don't know the risks, the sleepless nights, the sweat. They're just waiting for me to be gone so they can finally cash in the prize." Peggy had simply poured him a fresh cup of coffee, her heart aching for his profound loneliness. Now, listening to their entitled whispers, she felt no sting of insult, only a vast, empty pity for them. They were so blinded by the glare of the gold, they couldn't see the man who had forged it. And they had no idea that J.R.'s last will and testament was not just a document, but a final devastating lesson in character. The heavy oak door swung open, and Buford King, J.R.'s personal attorney and old hunting buddy, entered the room. He was a tall, imposing figure with a mane of white hair and eyes as sharp and clear as a Texas sky. He carried an ornate, leather-bound portfolio with the Ramsey cattle brand embossed in gold on the front. "My apologies for the wait." His voice was a low, courtroom rumble that commanded immediate silence. A man's final words deserved to be handled with precision. The heirs instantly composed themselves, their faces arranging into masks of solemn respect. Wyatt sank into a deep leather chair. Dallas produced her handkerchief again. Clayton leaned forward, his whole body trembling with avarice. Buford King sat at the head of the great mesquite desk, donned a pair of reading glasses, and ceremoniously opened the portfolio. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the frantic beating of 3 greedy hearts. "I, Jackson Ramsey, being of sound mind and resolute spirit, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," the lawyer began, his voice devoid of emotion. He paused, looking over his glasses at each of them. "To my brother Clayton Ramsey, I leave my entire collection of books on Texas history. In them are the stories of men who built empires from dust and determination. It is my final hope that he might finally read them and learn that a legacy is built with one's own 2 hands, not by holding them out to others." Clayton's jaw went slack. Books. He was expecting land deeds, mineral rights, stock certificates. He got a library. It was a slap in the face with a history textbook. He started to sputtering, but King's voice rolled right over him. "To my daughter, Dallas Ramsey Hayes, I bequeath the original Ramsey family homestead, all 150 acres of it, just outside of La Mesa, including the unair-conditioned 2-bedroom ranch house my father built with his own hands. May the hard work of mending fences and the silence of the West Texas plains remind her of where we came from, and of the simple, honest values she has long forgotten." Dallas let out a strangled gasp. The old ranch? The dusty, wind-blown plot of land with its creaky windmill and no swimming pool? She hadn't been there since she was a child. That's not funny!" she stammered, her face a mask of horror. Travis looked pale, clearly picturing a life without Neiman Marcus. The lawyer, unperturbed, fixed his gaze on Wyatt. To my son, Wyatt Ramsey, I leave my first championship rodeo belt buckle, which I won when I was 17, and my father's old pocket knife. May the buckle remind him that true pride is earned through grit and skill, not bought. And may the knife remind him that a man's worth is in what he can carve out for himself, not what is handed to him. Wyatt's face went from disbelief to a deep, blotchy purple. He shot out of his chair. A belt buckle? A damn pocket knife? Has he lost his mind? That senile old bastard. He cut me out. The room imploded. Dallas was now having a full-blown shrieking tantrum. Clayton was on his feet, babbling about undue influence and getting the will thrown out of court. Wyatt was pacing like a caged animal, threatening to sue everyone from the lawyer to the state of Texas itself. Through it all, Peggy Dawson remained silent, a small, still island in a sea of rage. She watched them, and her sorrow for JR was a physical ache. Even now they proved him right. They didn't mourn the man. They only mourned the money. Buford King let the storm rage for a full minute before he held up a single large hand. "That is not all," he boomed, his voice cutting through the noise like a thunderclap. "There is one final and most important provision." The fragile silence that fell was thick with desperation. The heirs, panting and red-faced, clung to a last wild shred of hope. Maybe this was all just a test? A cruel theatrical lesson from the grave before the real distribution of assets was announced? Wyatt was the first to recover. He stormed to the desk, planting his hands on the polished wood and leaning into Buford King's space. "All right, King, enough games. What's the punchline? Did he leave it all to Texas 8 To some damn charity for endangered armadillos? Stop playing with us and get to the point." "He can't do this. He just can't!" Dallas wailed, collapsing back onto the couch as Travis fanned her frantically with a copy of Texas Monthly. "We're his children, his blood, and he treats us like strangers. That dusty old ranch? I'll get heatstroke. He wants me to live like some pioneer woman from a history book." Clayton, ever the schemer, took a more insidious tack. His voice became a conspiratorial whisper. "Buford, listen to me. You and I both know Jack wasn't himself these last few years. After that last heart scare, he was on all sorts of medication. He was confused. A jury will see that. This document isn't worth the paper it's printed on. We can fight this! Together!" Then his venomous gaze found Peggy. A vile certainty dawned on his face. "Unless it was her," he hissed, pointing a shaking finger. "The loyal little secretary. In his ear, day in and day out, poisoning him against us, twisting his mind when he was weak. How much did he promise you for this little performance, Peggy? You think you can pull a fast one on the Ramsey family and get away with it?" Instantly, all their fury focused on her. "He's right!" Wyatt roared. "She was the only one with him. Always so quiet, so devoted. You were playing the long game, weren't you? What did you do? Slip something in his whiskey, you snake?" The accusations grew wilder, uglier. They painted her as a manipulative mastermind, a gold digger, a witch who had cast a spell on a vulnerable old man. They were a pack of wolves, turning on the one they perceived as the weakest link, the one standing between them and their rightful kill. Peggy Dawson slowly raised her head. For the first time, she met their rabid stares with her own. Her gaze was clear, steady, and cold as a blue norther. There was no fear in her eyes, no guilt, only a profound, bottomless disappointment and a flicker of righteous contempt. Her silence was more powerful than any denial. It was a judgment, and it drove them mad. She wasn't seeing the powerful Ramsey heirs. She was seeing 3 greedy, terrified children, lost and flailing without the safety net of their father's fortune. "That is quite enough!" Buford King's voice boomed, striking the desk with the flat of his hand. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He rose to his full height, a figure of absolute, unwavering authority. "You will show respect for the dead, and you will hear the final words of Jackson Ramsey." That was his command, and that is the law in this state. He picked up the document again, his expression grim. He was about to read the line that would detonate their world. Buford King let the silence stretch, his gaze passing over each of the heirs like a hawk surveying its territory. He saw their rage, their desperation, their pathetic, misplaced hope. Then his eyes rested for a moment on Peggy, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Before I read the final disposition," the lawyer announced, his voice taking on the weight of a final sermon, "J.R. insisted I read a personal statement he wrote for this occasion." He unfolded a separate sheet of paper, the Ramsey letterhead stark and official. The family leaned in, hanging on his every word. "To my children and my brother," King began, his voice filled with the gravity of J.R. S. posthumous words. "If you're hearing this, then I'm in the ground. I lived a big life, and I pray it was a good one. I built what you call an inheritance out of sheer grit and Texas dirt. I drilled dry holes, I lost fortunes, and I made them back again, all while you were busy spending the profits. I did it because I hoped I was building a dynasty, a family that would be known for its strength, its integrity, and its contribution to this great state." Wyatt scoffed under his breath. More lectures. "But I was a fool to believe it," the lawyer continued, the disappointment in J.R.'s words cutting through the air. "Year after year I watched you grow softer, greedier, more entitled. You never asked about the price of oil, the struggles of my foreman, or the risks I took every day. You only cared about your allowance. You cannot be trusted with the lives and livelihoods of the thousands of people who work for Caldwell, Texas Industries. You would run it into the ground before my body is cold. You cannot have what you did not earn, and what you would surely destroy." Wyatt's hands were balled into fists, his knuckles white. Dallas was chewing on her lip, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "This company is more than money. It's a responsibility. It's a promise to the families in Midland, in Houston, in every corner of this state where we operate. And I can only leave that promise in the hands of one person, the one person who is there for every late night, every bad deal, every triumphant gusher. The one who celebrated with me and mourned with me, not for a share of the profits, but out of true, honest-to-God loyalty. The one person who knows this company's heart and soul better than anyone." A confused silence filled the room. The heirs exchanged baffled looks, unable to comprehend his meaning. Buford King returned to the will, his voice ringing out with clarity and finality, striking each word like a hammer on an anvil. "Therefore, all of my property, real and personal, all stocks, bonds, mineral rights, and the entire controlling interest of Caldwell, Texas Industries, I bequeath to Miss Peggy Ann Dawson." A beat. A second beat. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a deep space vacuum. Wyatt, Dallas, and Clayton stared at the lawyer, then at the quiet woman in the simple dress, then back at the lawyer, their minds refusing to compute the impossible truth. Dallas was the first to break. A high theatrical wail escaped her lips before her eyes rolled back and she slumped bonelessly on the couch, a genuine faint this time. Travis yelped and tried to catch her. Clayton simply crumpled. The fight went out of him completely, and he sank into his chair, a broken man, staring into nothingness. And Wyatt? Wyatt turned his head slowly, mechanically, toward Peggy Dawson. His face was a deathly white, his eyes wide with a horrified, cosmic disbelief. He looked at his father's secretary, this quiet, unassuming woman he had dismissed his entire life, and the reality hit him like a physical blow. She was now the queen of the Texas oil patch, and he, Wyatt Ramsey, was left with a tarnished belt buckle. They were beyond speechless. The grand Texas drama had reached its shocking conclusion. The aftermath was as ugly and chaotic as a saloon brawl. Once revived, Dallas unleashed a torrent of incoherent shrieks and sobs. Wyatt, his shock curdling into pure rage, lunged toward the desk, shouting about fraud and conspiracies. "I'll ruin you, King!" "And as for you," he snarled, his face inches from Peggy's, "I will spend every last cent I have to see you in a jail cell. You hear me, you backstabbing nobody?" Buford King calmly spoke into his phone, and two security guards, both built like linebackers, materialized in the doorway. They efficiently and dispassionately escorted the hysterical Dallas, her flustered husband, and the sputtering, threatening Wyatt from the office. The heavy door closed, cutting off their enraged shouts. Clayton, without another word, shuffled out behind them, a ghost leaving his own haunting. In the sudden, profound silence of the vast office, only two people remained: the lawyer and the bewildered new empress of Texas industry. The adrenaline that had sustained Peggy drained away, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. She looked at J.R.'s massive desk, at the view of the city he had helped build, and the sheer, terrifying scale of what had happened washed over her. She had never wanted this. She had only ever wanted to do her job well and lead a quiet life. "Peggy," Buford King said, his voice now gentle. He approached her and held out another envelope, this one smaller, made of thick, creamy paper, and sealed with J.R.'s personal wax stamp. The front simply said, "For my Peggy. J.R. asked me to give this to you when the dust settled. This isn't for the lawyers. This is just for you." Her hands trembled as she took it. The paper felt warm, as if it still held his presence. She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside, covered in J.R.'s familiar, sprawling handwriting. "My Peggy," it began. "If you're reading this, then the vultures have been chased from the roost. I'm sorry for putting you through that. I know how you hate a fuss. But I had to be sure they showed their true colors one last time. And I wanted them, just once, to see you for who you really are, the bedrock of my entire life's work. This isn't a gift, Peggy. I know you too well for that. It's a burden. It's the biggest, heaviest damn burden I could put on anyone. But you're the only one with shoulders strong enough to carry it. You're the only one who won't let my people down, who won't sell off the land for a quick buck, who understands that our wealth comes from the ground, but our strength comes from our people. Don't you dare be scared. I know you are, but you have no reason to be. You have more integrity in your little finger than that whole bunch has in their entire bodies. You have the heart and the grit of a true Texan. That's all the guidance you'll ever need. I've had Buford put everything you need in the bottom drawer of my desk. All the private numbers, the real ledgers, the keys to everything. He'll stand by you. He's a good man. One last thing. Go buy that little place in the hill country you always dreamed of, the one with the blue bonnets. Take a weekend off. You've earned it 1,000 times over. Thank you, Peggy, for everything. Your friend, J.R. A tear, hot and heavy, fell from her eye onto the page, blurring his name. It was a tear of grief, of gratitude, and of a terrifying, awesome acceptance. She folded the letter, tucked it safely in her purse, and looked up at Buford King. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a quiet, unshakable resolve. She would not fail him. The week that followed was a whirlwind of legal jargon and endless signatures. Peggy, with Buford King as her guide, waded through the murky waters of corporate law, officially taking the helm of Caldwell, Texas Industries. The story broke in the Wall Street Journal and the Dallas Morning News, sending shockwaves from the boardrooms of Houston to the oil fields of Midland. Her quiet life in Garland was over. Today was her first day. She entered the penthouse office, the same space she had tidied and managed for 3 decades. But she entered it as its master. At Buford's gentle insistence, she had replaced her modest dresses with a collection of sharply tailored, elegant suits. Today's was a deep navy blue that gave her an air of quiet authority. She sat in J.R.'s chair. It was enormous, the worn leather smelling faintly of him. It felt less like a chair and more like a throne. For a moment, a wave of panic washed over her. The urge to flee, to sell everything and retreat to a quiet, anonymous life was immense. But then, J.R.'s words echoed in her mind. A promise to the families, the people who work for Caldwell, Texas Industries. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the intercom. "Please ask Mr. Calhoun, head of security, to come to my office," she said, her voice even and firm, surprising even herself. A moment later, a formidable man with a sun-weathered face and a direct, honest gaze stood before her. Jed Calhoun had been J.R.'s security chief for 2 decades. He was loyal to the man and, by extension, to the brand. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful but watchful. "Jed, please sit down." She gestured to a chair. "I have my first task for you." J.R. often worried that we had too many passengers, people drawing a big paycheck for a fancy title, most of them put here as favors for family and friends. Calhoun gave a short, knowing nod. "That's a fact, ma'am, mister. Ramsey's hands were tied on that front. "Well, they're not tied anymore," she stated plainly. "I'm not looking to start a war, but I need to know who is pulling their weight and who is just weighing us down. I want you to prepare a real report for me, Jed, not the HR fluff. I want to know who J.R.S people are, the loyal old-timers, the sharp young engineers, the ones who really make this company run. And I want to know who's just here for the ride. Start with the executive floor." Calhoun looked at her, and a slow smile of genuine respect spread across his face. He had been expecting hesitation, confusion. He found clear-eyed purpose. She wasn't redecorating, she was reinforcing the foundation. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice full of a new energy. "It'll be a pleasure." After he left, Peggy walked to the window. Dallas sprawled beneath her, glittering in the afternoon sun. The fear was still a knot in her stomach, but a new feeling was blooming alongside it, a sense of righteous purpose. She wasn't JR, and she wouldn't try to be, but she would run his company with the one thing his heirs so desperately lacked: integrity. A month later, the atmosphere at Caldwell Texas Industries had changed. The lazy entitlement that had permeated the executive suites was gone, replaced by a focused, nervous energy. Several notoriously incompetent vice presidents, including Wyatt's former fraternity brother, who ran the global outreach department from a golf course, had been given modest severance packages and shown the door. In their places, Peggy had promoted talented, hard-working managers from within the company, people who had been loyal to JR but overlooked by his family. Today, she had called her first meeting of the full board of directors. They were a formidable group of Texas power brokers, weathered wildcatters, slick corporate lawyers, and legacy ranchers with names as old as the state itself. They watched her take her seat, their faces a mixture of deep skepticism and cautious curiosity. They saw an anomaly, a secretarial fluke. Peggy, dressed in her now signature navy suit, didn't take the chairman's seat at the head of the table. She took a regular seat among them, a subtle gesture of partnership, not dominance. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her voice filling the silent room. "I've called you here today not to go over production forecasts, but to talk about our legacy, to talk about what the name Caldwell Texas Industries should mean for the next 50 years. The board members shifted, intrigued. JR. Ramsey was a builder. He built a great company. Now it is our job to build on his foundation and make it not just bigger but better, to make it stronger by giving back to the state that gave us everything." She paused, making eye contact with each person. "To that end, my first major act as CEO is to establish the Loretta Ramsey Foundation, in honor of J.R.'s late wife. The foundation's mission will be twofold: to provide full engineering and geology scholarships to students at Texas A&M and the University of Texas, with a focus on kids from rural communities, and to fund and staff mobile healthcare clinics for underserved communities in West Texas. To start the foundation, I will be making an initial donation of $100 million from the personal funds I inherited. And going forward, 5% of this company's net annual profit will be dedicated to its work." A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. These men, who lived and breathed profit margins and stock prices, were speechless. They had expected a timid speech about continuity. They had not expected a bold, sweeping act of philanthropy that would redefine the company's entire public identity. "I want the Ramsey name," Peggy said, her voice filled with quiet passion, "to stand not just for oil derricks and land deeds, but for opportunity, for health, for the future of Texas. I can think of no better way to honor the memory of its founder." She finished and looked around the table, and in the eyes of those tough, hardened Texas businessmen, she saw their skepticism melt away, replaced by a dawning, profound respect. In that moment, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, alone in the great office, she watched the endless river of headlights flowing across the Dallas freeways. The fear was finally gone, replaced by the heavy, comforting mantle of duty. Somewhere out in the vast state, the Ramsey heirs were likely squabbling over the scraps JR had left them, their world shrunken to the size of their own bitterness. But they were the past. The future was here, a new era for a company with a conscience. And leading it was a quiet woman from Garland, who understood that the greatest legacy isn't what you own, but what you build for others.